Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video, I just want to go over the last little bit of the instructional sequence that we're going to, and then review a little bit about what's coming up in the course. So kind of as we look at what our agenda is, slides working here. There we go. We're going to talk about movement strategies and lesson closure and really wrap up the white book. And then we'll talk about the lesson plan assignment, discussion 3, and then kind of the plans for the rest of the semester, just so we are all on the same page and can finish strong. And then at the very end, I'll give a very brief SEED 394 update, especially for those students that have not done the Class C resources presentation. Okay, so let's talk about movement strategies real quick. So White talks about movement in chapter 5, and she really emphasized this idea that people are designed to move, right? We shouldn't be sitting around all day. We should be active in some way, right? And the same thing goes for when we are in school, except schools typically don't reinforce this idea that we should move, right? And what happens is as you sit, the longer you sit, and typically after about 10 minutes, your awareness starts going down, right? Especially of the things kind of going on around you, emotional sensations, that kind of stuff, and you start getting more fatigued, right? That's why we get bored typically after a few minutes of sitting, okay? So we want to try and reduce the amount of sitting that students do where they're not kind of active doing something. Because when we do that and when we move, our brains tend to function a little bit better than if we're just sitting, okay? Now, White talks about creating purposeful movement, and when she defines purposeful, she's really talking about having some kind of instructional intent behind our movement. So it's really this idea that we need to be moving around while also processing whatever content that we're learning, right? The movement's not just getting up and running around the room or anything like that, or doing jumping jacks, although sometimes those brain breaks are a good idea to do too. But it's more that we're trying to connect it to the learning that we're actually doing and the other activities that are taking place in the classroom. Now, we've done this a couple times in class, kind of before spring break, and we did it usually with the stand-up, hand-up, pair-up. And the idea, and this is out of the white book, it's actually where I found it, and I really like this one because it's a simple way to kind of encourage discussion with students that are maybe across the room that students might not always interact with. And it's a super basic strategy where you basically give the students a prompt, something you want them to discuss, and then the students write out their response, and then they take a minute, stand up, put their hand up, find someone across the room, and go and talk. Right? After a minute, maybe they do this 2 or 3 different times. That way they talk with a bunch of different people, and then you kind of come together and kind of debrief whatever the question was. Okay, kind of like a modified think, pair, share. Instead of doing the pairing with the students right next to you, you get to talk to students across the room, which I think is a good idea. That's how you kind of build that classroom community, by talking and interacting with other people in the classroom. So that's chapter 5. It was a pretty quick chapter. All these chapters are really actually pretty quick. So there's a ton more strategies on how to create purposeful movement in your classes. So go ahead and take a peek at those. And then in chapter 6, she really talked about the lesson closure, which is really just the end of the lesson. We're talking about the last 5 minutes or so of class, sometimes maybe up to 10 minutes. And the idea is that at the end of our lessons, we want to try and help students make sense out of what we just did, right? You spent 50 minutes or more doing all kinds of different things. So let's try to help them make some sense out of it and see what they know. And the lesson closure is a great time to do some formative assessment with your students. Typically, we see this through like an exit ticket or a journal, or even like a simple class discussion. And these kind of formative assessments can be as simple as, the thumbs up, thumbs down if they understand different things that you talked about in class that day, different things they did, or it could be things like a full-on, you're collecting data through like an exit ticket or a journal. Okay, so there's lots of options there, but the main goal that you're trying to do in a lesson closure is that you're trying to clarify any misunderstandings that students have and really help them retain some of that information. And that's why we kind of call it a sense-making experience. And White has a ton of different strategies that you can use. There's all kinds of lesson closure ideas that you can find on the internet. A couple of the pretty popular ones that we tend to see are exit tickets that we can do, and you can facilitate that with something as simple as Post-it notes or sheets of paper. You can do something a little more fancy with like a poll everywhere or a Google form or something like that. Or you can do something like a journal, right? And maybe it's a paper journal that they hand in, or even something like a Google Doc or a blog post. Maybe something in Google Classroom, kind of like what we were doing at the beginning of the semester. There's all kinds of options for lesson closures. And they're pretty important because it does give you some of that information that you can see, did my lesson go successful, right? Was I successful in helping students learn something today? So they're a good thing to have at the end of your lesson. Okay. So that is basically it for lesson planning. We've gone through pretty much everything there is to do in lesson planning. And if you have questions about anything we've done so far, you just need to let me know. And I know I haven't gotten you feedback on the assessment assignment, and I think a couple of you are still waiting for me on the standard and objective assignment. And I'm going to get those things graded here the first part of this next week. So you have that before we get into what's coming next, which is our lesson plan assignment. That's kind of where we're heading to. We're kind of marching towards that pretty quickly here. So what I've done is, since we are basically at the end of this, if you think of it as a unit, we have really about a week and a half to 2 weeks worth of stuff to do. And first up is we have a couple readings for you to do, the content from White in chapters 5 and 6, which shouldn't take you overly long, probably about a half hour at most to read. And then we have our third discussion post, which is going to be due, the first post is due on the 8th. And then the discussion will end on the 15th. And I did it through the 15th because there is Easter in there, and I know a number of you will be celebrating Easter. So I want to make sure that we weren't interfering with that and having things due on either the Friday or the Monday, kind of surrounding the Easter weekend. So kind of built in some flexibility there. So I pushed that out, and I believe the 15th is a Wednesday. So it kind of gives you a full week to do the discussion, okay? Now, I'll talk about the discussion in a minute, but the other thing that's kind of coming is that lesson plan assignment, and I'm going to talk about that first because that's due on the 19th of this month. Okay, so it's a 20-point assignment, and the idea here is that you learn pretty much everything you need to know to be able to write a pretty good lesson plan, I think, at this point. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to design and develop a full lesson plan. And as far as like the length of your class period, your kind of hypothetical class periods, it can be, you need to have at least one 50-minute class period planned. You can do more than that, although I would encourage you just to stick with one 50-minute class period because the longer you make a lesson, the more complex it gets. But it's up to you. I'll let you kind of have control over that. But then the topic of the lesson is really on anything of your choice, as long as it's something that you would conceivably teach in the future, right? So if you're a history major, it needs to be some kind of social studies topic, a math topic, you get the idea. And then the overall length of your lesson plan is what you're shooting for is about 4 pages. Okay, try not to go too much past 4 pages, and I do provide a template, and hopefully that will help you kind of structure and be successful in the lesson plan. Now, what I want to do real briefly is go through each of the different sections of the lesson plan and talk about what you need to do and what my expectation is, kind of really following along with what's in the assignment description and the rubric, okay? So first up is going to be the content standards, and you need to have at least one. And when you do this, when you put this in your lesson plan, you need to have both the kind of the identifier or the standard number. That way I know if it's coming from like the Common Core or wherever it's almost like a citation in a way. So have both the ID number for it as well as the full text of the standard. And definitely having the full text is important, otherwise I'm gonna have to go look it up and that will just really slow things down. But like beyond that though, I think it does help you as you're writing your learning objective, make sure that everything aligns back to that standard. Okay. The next step is the learning objective. So we've done a lot with learning objectives. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that when you write your learning objective that you are aligned to your content standard and that you have all 4 parts of the learning objective. Okay. Now your learning objective also needs to be a single sentence. Okay. So we're working on some of those mechanics on how we write these things. And then I want you to have at least one formative assessment, and this formative assessment needs to inform us of student learning progress, which means you need to collect some data. So it can't just be a thumbs up, a thumbs down kind of thing. It needs to be something like an exit ticket, a journal entry, a draft of whatever the summative assessment is, something that you can provide feedback to students with, okay? So that's what we're looking for in terms of formative assessment. With summative assessment, it's going to be the same thing as what you state as the product in your objective. So if you say that students are going to create a poster, your summative assessment is that poster. Okay, now you need to create a rubric, and on your rubric you need to have 3 to 5 criteria, and those need to be content focused. Okay, try not to lump all of your content criteria into one criteria that says content, and that students will have an understanding of the content because you haven't defined your expectations. Very unclear what that really means. So really break down what is the performance that you're wanting to see from your students in this product that they create, okay? And then describe, 3 to 4 levels of quality, okay? What's the meet expectation column look like? Then what's the approaching expectations column look like? What does the does not meet expectations column look like, okay? And then with those levels of quality, make sure if you attach a number to them that you don't have overlapping numbers, like if it's 3 points and then a 3 to 2 and then a 2 to 1 and a 1 to 0. Like where's a 2 fall? Is that in this column or this column kind of thing, okay? And then last thing with summit assessment, you need to make sure you have the instructions either in your lesson plan activity or as its own separate handout that you include as an instructional material as part of the appendix. Because you will have an appendix to this, and I'll talk about that here in just a second, okay? And then the next part here is the instructional strategies and learning tasks, and this is probably going to be the most detailed part of your lesson plan, okay? This is where you're going to describe what's going to happen from start to finish in those 50 minutes of your lesson, okay? So you're going to have a lesson opener, anticipatory set, right? That's how you're going to start. We're looking at about 5 minutes of time there. Then you're going to have the vast majority of your lesson through one or more learning tasks and activities that students do. And then you have some kind of lesson closure, okay? So those are the 3 sections within the instructional strategies section that you need to have, okay? And that's where you can really rely on what we've talked about in the Denise White book that we just are wrapping up this week, okay? So you can rely on some of those things, pull them in, and kind of construct a lesson using that, okay? And then the last section of the lesson plan are the instructional resources and materials, and that's really just a list of the things you're going to need in the lesson. So if you need, say, a smartboard or a laptop or iPads or any number of given things, handouts, textbooks, those kinds of things. Right now you can find a lot of online textbooks, so if you're wanting to, include one of those, you can include one of those. Now, the things that you will actually need to give to students and use in the lesson, so things like PowerPoints or handouts or any kind of assignment sheets, those kinds of things, you need to actually create those and include those as an appendix. Now the appendix is just going to be stuff that you upload to the D2L Dropbox for this assignment. That's not the lesson plan, okay? So you don't have to create a separate file for the appendix necessarily. You just need to upload those files separately in D2L in the Dropbox, and those things do not count towards your overall lesson plan page length, okay? So then when it comes time to submit, there are 2 things really that you're going to submit: the lesson plan that you write, and then any instructional materials that you create. Those are the things I'm going to grade. So make sure you get those uploaded by April 19th so that we can get those graded. And then all the things I just went over here are in the assignment description. That's where I pulled everything from. So you can go ahead and pull up the assignment description. It includes the rubric. All that is in D2L for this week, so that you can find that. And if you have questions, you just gotta let me know. Okay. Now, to help prepare you for this assignment, our discussion 3 is really going to be a practice lesson that you do. Okay. So what you're going to do is you are going to write your own full practice lesson plan. And you're going to have that done by April 8th. And really what we're doing here is just reusing a lot of the things that we've been working on over the last few weeks, okay? Kind of starting way back with that standards and objective assignment. You can go all the way back to that and start pulling some of those things in and anything you've done in the discussions and put together kind of that full lesson plan, okay? And you're going to post that to the discussion boards. And what I want you to do is basically do the full lesson plan assignment basically twice, once for practice and then once for the grade. And in the discussion, you're going to include the content standards, learning objectives, the assessments, and then your instructional strategies. Those are the 4 things you need to make sure that you have included. You can use the template if you'd like for this. There's certainly no requirement. But the idea is, like, let's go through some of these tasks, putting it together so we have some feedback from each other before you actually have to submit it for a grade. Okay, so get a little bit of practice doing the full thing. So you need to have that part done, the full lesson plan posted by the 8th, so that over the next week, before the 15th, your peers can do a peer assessment of your lesson plan, okay? So you're gonna peer assess each of the peers in your discussion group, so it's about 3 other people, and you're gonna use the rubric for the lesson plan assignment. Now in the discussion, I have created a link that takes you straight to the rubrics that should be easy to find, and I want you to go through and identify where didn't they meet the rubric expectations, right? Give kind of that critical eye and say, you know what, I don't think you wrote your lesson plan. I don't see, you didn't write your learning objective correctly. I don't see a product, or I don't see the criteria, or whatever it might be. Or how are students gonna learn about this topic that they need to do in their summative assessment? I don't see where you do that yet. Where does that show up in your lesson plan? Okay, and the idea is that you're going to provide suggestions to the people in your group for making that lesson a little bit better. Okay, so hopefully that'll get you some practice before we begin, doing the actual lesson plan assignment, for a grade. Because that's the point we're at. We have done everything we need to do with lesson planning, so this is kind of the last step, is that summative assessment piece, and we're going to do one kind of final activity before we get there. Okay. Now, as we look forward for the rest of the semester, I have planned everything out that we're going to do. I've gone over the next 2 weeks. So when we come back together on the 20th, we are going to start our kind of final project for the class. And it's focused on unit planning and inquiry-based learning, which are the last two topics we haven't really talked a ton about in this class. Unit planning really isn't all that much different than lesson planning. It's just on a larger scale. So instead of like a 50-minute class period, you're looking at, several 50-minute class periods together, usually 2 to 3 weeks in length is what we have for units. And we're going to ground that within this idea of inquiry-based learning that we should be doing in schools. That week, we will have a very brief discussion activity, basically going to pick a topic, I think, for your unit, and then how are you going to connect it with inquiry-based learning in some way, okay? That week, I will also introduce the research project and everything you have to do with that so that you have a full 2 weeks to get that done. And then on the 27th, that next week, I will open up our course final, and the final will be due on May 4th. And then we will also have a synchronous class meeting on April 28th at 12:30 p.m. It'll probably be like Zoom or something like that. But we are going to have our guest speaker still. We're going to still have Teresa Skinner come in and talk to us briefly about the USD Teacher Residency Program, because that's going to be your life in the not too distant future. I believe a number of you are starting this coming fall, and then I think almost all of you, the rest of you, are starting the following spring. So we need to just learn a little bit more about what's coming up. That way you are fully prepared and ready to go. And then the last thing I haven't talked about on the table here is that the research project will be due on May 1st. Okay? So that's where we're going. That's where we're headed. Definitely a lot of changes have happened just because of everything going on. But I think I've put together something that hopefully won't be too overwhelming, but still help you move forward, get you the content and the experiences that you need to be successful as you get ready for that next step into your residency and then into your career. Okay? So that's what I have for Seed 400. Now for Seed 394, I have a very, very brief update for you. So in addition to all the other assignments that you have to do, there was, I think, about 2/3 of the class that had yet to do the Classy resources presentations, just because they shut us down before we could do those. So we need to get that assignment wrapped up. So I thought I could maybe create something different, but I thought it would probably be just as easy as if we just stick with that assignment, have you work together at a distance, and then we'll do a group presentation over Zoom. And you'll just present to me, and I'll record it and throw it up in D2L so others can watch it if they'd like. Okay, so that's the plan as of now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to email each group, and we're going to set up a time when you can present. And the presentations only have to be, what is it, like 10 to 15 minutes, something like that. So it's not going to be an overly long presentation. But I will, send that email. We'll set up a time when we can all meet in Zoom, and then I'll go over some of those expectations again with you, just so you know what we're going for. Okay. So with that, that's all I have for this week and really for the next 2 weeks. So I'll see you online. If you have questions, remember you can email me. You can post a question in that Ask Dr. Emma question forum in D2L. And then we have the online office half hour that you can attend as well. Otherwise, I will see you online, and stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.